The flames danced in the darkness, casting eerie shadows across Pearl Nichols' face as she huddled against the cold Montana night, her heart pounding with dread at the thought of reaching Deer Lodge by morning. The year was 1876, and Pearl had nowhere else to go. The letter from her deceased aunt's lawyer promised her only inheritance, a small millinery shop that might offer the fresh start she desperately needed. The stagecoach had broken an axle 5 miles back, forcing Pearl and the other passengers to make camp until morning when help would arrive from town. She kept to herself, face partially hidden beneath the brim of her bonnet, body turned away from the curious glances of her fellow travelers. "Miss, would you care for some coffee?" The driver extended a tin cup toward her. Pearl hesitated before accepting with her gloved hands, careful not to show her face. "Thank you kindly." A portly businessman seated across from her squinted through the firelight. "You heading to Deer Lodge for business or pleasure, miss?" "Business," she answered softly. "I've inherited my aunt's hat shop." "Ah, you must be Marion Tyler's niece then," said an older woman with gray hair pinned tightly beneath her hat. "I'm Eunice Whittaker. I knew your aunt well." "Fine woman, excellent milliner." Pearl nodded, keeping her face averted. "Yes, she taught me the trade when I was younger." The businessman leaned forward, trying to get a better look at her face. "You're a shy one, aren't you? No need to be bashful out here. We're all friends on the frontier." When Pearl didn't respond, he reached out suddenly, intending to touch her shoulder in what he might have considered a friendly gesture. She flinched, turning away sharply, but her quick movement caused her bonnet to slip. Gasps rippled around the campfire. Pearl froze, mortified. The right side of her face, now exposed to their view, bore a network of raised pink and white scars from her temple to her jaw, twisting across her cheek in a pattern that told the story of the fire that had nearly claimed her life 3 years earlier. "Good Lord!" the businessman exclaimed, recoiling. "What in heaven's name happened to you, girl?" Pearl's hands trembled as she quickly adjusted her bonnet, but the damage was done. She'd seen the looks 1,000 times: disgust, pity, revulsion, but they never hurt any less. "I survived a fire," she said quietly, standing to move away from them. "If you'll excuse me." "Wait, miss," called the businessman, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "No need to run off, it's just that. Well, it's quite a shock to see a young lady so marked." Eunice Whittaker clucked her tongue. "Have some decency, Mr. Billings. The poor girl can't help her misfortune." Their words stung worse than the flames ever had. Pearl walked to the edge of the firelight, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She'd hoped things might be different in Deer Lodge, that perhaps in a small frontier town she could start fresh. But the familiar ache of rejection settled in her chest, heavy and cold. The night stretched endlessly, and Pearl slept little. When dawn broke over the Montana hills, she was already awake, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and pink. She heard the approaching horses before she saw them, riders from town coming to assist the stranded travelers. "Looks like our rescue party," announced the driver, getting to his feet. 3 men on horseback approached the camp, leading 2 additional horses. The leader, a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered Stetson, dismounted with easy grace. "Morning, folks. I'm Rusty Thompson, Deputy Sheriff of Deer Lodge." His voice carried the natural authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Got word your coach broke down. We've brought help and some fresh horses." Pearl kept her distance, watching as the passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to continue their journey. Deputy Thompson efficiently organized the group, helping the older passengers mount the horses while instructing others to walk alongside. His gaze eventually fell on Pearl, standing apart from the others. "Madam," he called, "we'll need to get moving if we want to reach town before midday." Pearl nodded, gathering her courage as she approached. She'd positioned her bonnet and arranged her hair to conceal as much of her scarred side as possible, but she could feel the deputy's eyes on her face. Unlike the others, his expression revealed nothing, no shock, no disgust, not even pity. Just steady blue eyes that met hers directly. "You can ride with me, madam," he said, extending his hand. "The trail's a bit rough for walking in those city shoes." Pearl hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm as he helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The closeness made her uncomfortable. She wasn't accustomed to being so near a stranger, especially a man. But there was something reassuring in his solid presence. They rode in silence for several minutes before he spoke. "First time in Montana territory?" "Yes," she answered. "I lived in Philadelphia most of my life." "Long way from home," he observed. "What brings you to our little corner of the frontier?" "My Aunt Marion Tyler passed away. I've inherited her millinery shop." She felt him nod. "Miss Marion's niece. She mentioned you'd be coming someday." "Good woman, your aunt. Town hasn't been the same without her." Pearl swallowed hard. How did she die?" "Pneumonia took her last winter. It was quick, at least. Doc Simmons did what he could." They crested a hill, and below them spread a valley with a small town nestled against the backdrop of towering mountains. Deer Lodge was bigger than Pearl had expected. Several streets of wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the others, and scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding countryside. "That's it," Deputy Thompson said. "Not Philadelphia, but we've got most everything you need. General store, doctor, hotel. 2 saloons, though you'll want to avoid the rusty nail on payday unless you enjoy barroom brawls." His casual conversation calmed her nerves slightly. As they approached the town, he added, "Your aunt's shop is on Main Street next to the dressmakers. Mrs. Finch has been keeping an eye on the place. She has the keys." Pearl nodded, bracing herself for arrival. The stares would begin anew, the whispers would follow, and the cycle of rejection would start again in this town where she'd hoped to disappear. As they rode down the main street, townspeople paused in their activities to watch the approaching party. Pearl felt exposed under their curious gazes, despite her efforts to keep her scarred side hidden. Deputy Thompson reined his horse to a stop in front of a tidy 2-story building with a large display window. A wooden sign hung above the door, "Tyler's Fine Millinery." "Here we are," he said, dismounting before helping her down. Pearl stood before her new home and business, heart racing with equal parts hope and dread. The shop looked well maintained, with fresh paint and clean windows. Above the shop was what appeared to be living quarters, her aunt's home, now hers. "I'll have your trunk brought over when the stage-coach is repaired," Deputy Thompson said, tipping his hat. "Mrs. Finch is likely at the dressmaker's next door. She'll help you get settled." "Thank you, Deputy," Pearl said, finally looking directly at him. His face was handsome in a rugged way, tanned from the sun with laugh lines around his eyes. He didn't flinch or look away when he saw her scars. "Rusty," he corrected with a slight smile. "Everyone calls me Rusty," she nodded, offering a small smile in return. "I'm Pearl Nichols." "Welcome to Deer Lodge, Miss Nichols." He tipped his hat again before mounting his horse. "If you need anything, Sheriff's office is just down the street." Pearl watched him ride away, then turned toward the dressmaker's shop. A bell jingled as she entered, and a plump woman with silver-streaked brown hair looked up from her sewing. "Why, you must be Marion's niece," she exclaimed, setting aside her work and bustling forward. "I'm Harriet Finch. We've been expecting you, though the stage wasn't due until tomorrow." "Broken axle," Pearl explained. "Deputy Thompson brought us in." Mrs. Finch nodded, her eyes taking in Pearl's appearance. To her credit, her gaze only briefly flickered to the scarred side of Pearl's face before returning to her eyes. "You poor dear, what a journey you've had. Come, let me show you the shop and get you settled upstairs. You must be exhausted." Pearl followed the chattering woman through a connecting door into the millinery shop. The familiar smells of fabric, straw, and ribbon enveloped her, bringing a rush of memories from the summers she'd spent with Aunt Marion learning the trade. The shop was neat and well organized, with wooden shelves displaying hat forms, ribbons, flowers, and feathers. Several completed hats sat on stands, covered in thin muslin to protect them from dust. "Your aunt was teaching me to take over when she fell ill," Mrs. Finch explained. "I've kept things going as best I could, but I'm no milliner. The ladies of Deer Lodge have been making do with ordered hats from Helena, but they'll be thrilled to have a proper milliner again." She led Pearl up a narrow staircase to the living quarters, a cozy apartment with a sitting room, bedroom, and small kitchen. The furnishings were simple but elegant, much like Aunt Marion herself had been. "I've kept it clean and aired out," Mrs. Finch said proudly. "And there's food in the pantry, bread I baked fresh this morning, preserves, coffee, and such. The pump in the kitchen works well, and there's a washroom off the bedroom with a proper tub." Pearl was overwhelmed by the woman's kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Finch. You've been very thoughtful." "Nonsense, dear. Marion was my dearest friend. She spoke of you often, how talented you were with designs, how proud she was of your skills." Mrs. Finch hesitated, then added gently, "She told me about your accident, too. Said you were the bravest soul she'd ever known." Pearl's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't seen her aunt since the fire. They'd corresponded regularly, but Pearl had been too ashamed of her appearance to visit. "I'll leave you to rest," Mrs. Finch said, pressing the shop keys into Pearl's hand. "Come for supper tonight, 7 o'clock. My house is just behind the shop. My husband Ernest will want to meet you, and you shouldn't be alone your first night in town." After Mrs. Finch departed, Pearl explored her new home, tracing her fingers over her aunt's belongings, now hers. In the bedroom, she found a framed photograph of herself as a child with Aunt Marion before the fire, when her face was whole and unmarred. Pearl removed her bonnet and stood before the mirror, forcing herself to look at the reflection she usually avoided. The right side of her face was a landscape of scars, some raised and pink, others white and shiny. The fire had taken her right eyebrow and part of her hairline, and though her eye had been spared, the skin around it pulled tight, giving her a perpetually surprised look on that side. The contrast with the left side of her face, smooth skin, delicate features, only emphasized the devastation. She'd once been considered a beauty. Now she was an object of pity and revulsion. Pearl unpinned her hair, letting the chestnut waves fall to cover some of the scarring. She would rebuild her life here. She would focus on her work, keep to herself, and perhaps find a measure of peace in this frontier town where no one knew the beautiful girl she'd once been. The next morning, Pearl rose early, determined to reacquaint herself with the millinery shop. After a simple breakfast, she descended to the workroom behind the main shop area. Everything was organized exactly as Aunt Marion had taught her: ribbons by color and width, feathers by type and size, straw and fabric neatly stacked. She ran her fingers over the familiar tools: wooden hat blocks in various shapes and sizes, steam presses, wire frames. This, at least, was unchanged. Her hands remembered what to do, even if her heart still felt uncertain. Pearl opened the shop at 9 o'clock, not expecting customers, but wanting to establish a routine. The bell above the door jingled throughout the morning as curious townsfolk stopped by, ostensibly to welcome her, but clearly to get a look at Marion Tyler's scarred niece. Most were polite, if visibly startled by her appearance. A few women placed orders for new spring hats, studying the design books with genuine interest. Pearl kept her professional demeanor, measuring head sizes and discussing styles and materials, grateful for the focus on business rather than herself. Shortly after noon, the bell jingled again. Pearl looked up from her ledger to see 3 well-dressed women enter, led by a tall, slender blonde with an air of self-importance. "You must be the new milliner," the blonde said, looking Pearl up and down with undisguised curiosity. "I'm Victoria Harrington. My husband owns the bank. These are my friends, Mrs. Alina Foster and Mrs. Sarah Donovan." Pearl nodded politely. "Pearl Nichols. It's a pleasure to meet you ladies." Victoria moved closer, her eyes fixed on Pearl's scars with morbid fascination. Marion never mentioned her niece was marked. She spoke as if Pearl couldn't hear her. "What happened to you, dear?" "A childhood accident," Pearl stiffened. "A fire 3 years ago. May I show you our spring designs? I've brought several new patterns from Philadelphia." The woman ignored her attempt to change the subject. "How dreadful for you. And at your age, what are you, 22, 23? Such a shame." "I'm 24, Pearl answered, struggling to maintain her composure. "Now, regarding hats, Victoria," hissed Alina Foster, "show some manners." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "I'm only being sympathetic, Alina. The poor girl must know she's unusual looking. It must make business difficult in a profession that relies on beauty and fashion." Pearl's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to remain professional. "My appearance has no bearing on my skills as a milliner, Mrs. Harrington. Now, if you're interested in placing an order, I'd be happy to assist you. If not, I have inventory to complete." Victoria's eyes narrowed at the rebuff. "Well, I suppose we'll see if the women of Deer Lodge are comfortable purchasing fashion advice from someone so unfortunate." She turned to her companions. "Come, ladies. I believe we can find better selections in Helena." They swept out, leaving Pearl alone in the silent shop. She gripped the edge of the counter, fighting back tears of humiliation. It was Philadelphia all over again, the stares, the whispers, the cruelty thinly veiled as concern. The bell jingled again, and Pearl quickly composed herself, expecting more gawkers. Instead, Deputy Thompson stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Nichols," he greeted her. "Thought I'd check in, see how you're settling in." Pearl straightened, smoothing her apron. "Deputy Thompson, I'm managing well, thank you." His eyes, observant by profession, noted her reddened eyes and tense posture. "Just ran into Victoria Harrington and her hens on my way in. They seemed in quite a state." Pearl couldn't help a small, bitter smile. "Yes, well, I'm afraid Mrs. Harrington found my appearance rather disturbing." She expressed concern that the ladies of Deer Lodge might not want fashion advice from someone so unfortunate. Rusty's jaw tightened. "Victoria Harrington is the most unfortunate person in this town, though she doesn't know it. All that money and not an ounce of decency." He stepped further into the shop, glancing around. "Your aunt was well respected here. Folks trusted her judgment. They'll come around to you too." "That's kind of you to say, Deputy, but I've learned not to expect too much." Pearl moved behind the counter, putting distance between them. "Was there something specific you needed?" He studied her for a moment. "Just being neighborly. And I told you it's Rusty." "Rusty then," she conceded. "I appreciate your concern, but I'll be fine. I'm quite accustomed to reactions like Mrs. Harrington's." "Well, you shouldn't have to be," he said firmly. "Not in this town." He placed his hat back on his head. "I'll leave you to your work, but I meant what I said yesterday. If you need anything, you know where to find me." After he left, Pearl returned to her inventory, but her mind kept drifting back to the deputy's visit. His manner was different from what she'd grown accustomed to. No pity, no awkwardness, just straightforward kindness. It was refreshing. The following days fell into a pattern. Pearl worked diligently in the shop, filling the orders that trickled in despite Victoria Harrington's apparent campaign against her. Mrs. Finch visited regularly, bringing baked goods and town gossip. And every other day or so, Deputy Thompson would stop by, ostensibly to check on her welfare but lingering to chat about the town and its inhabitants. She learned that Rusty Thompson had come to Montana Territory after the Civil War, seeking a fresh start like so many others. He'd been deputy for 6 years under Sheriff William Hayes, a former Union captain who ran the town with firm but fair leadership. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Pearl's arrival, the shop bell jingled and a young woman hurried in, looking nervous. "Miss Nichols?" she asked timidly. "I'm Emma Wilson. I was wondering if you might have time for a hat fitting." Pearl smiled warmly, recognizing the need to put the girl at ease. "Of course, Miss Wilson. What sort of hat were you looking for?" Emma glanced around as if afraid of being seen. "Something for church." "My old one is terribly shabby and I'm to sing a solo next Sunday." "I have several styles that would suit you beautifully," Pearl said, bringing out her design book. "Your coloring would be lovely with blue ribbons, I think." As they discussed designs, Emma gradually relaxed. She was a sweet girl of 19, the daughter of the town's blacksmith. Pearl took her measurements and helped her select a simple straw hat with blue ribbons and small white flowers. "It will be ready by Saturday," Pearl promised, "and you'll look charming for your solo." Emma hesitated at the door. "Miss Nichols, I hope you don't mind my asking, but your scars, do they hurt still?" The question was asked with such genuine concern that Pearl couldn't take offense. "Not anymore," she answered honestly. "They did at first, terribly. But now they're just part of me." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I think you're very brave, and I think you're still beautiful even with them." She blushed. "That sounds impertinent, doesn't it? I'm sorry." Pearl felt a lump in her throat. "Not at all, Miss Wilson. That's one of the kindest things anyone has said to me in a very long time." After Emma left, Pearl found herself smiling as she worked on the girl's hat. Perhaps there was hope for her in Deer Lodge after all. That evening, as Pearl was closing the shop, she heard angry voices from the street. Looking out, she saw a group of men gathered outside the Rusty Nail Saloon. At the center of the commotion stood Rusty Thompson, facing down a tall, bearded man who appeared highly intoxicated. "I told you last time, Burke," Rusty was saying, his voice calm but firm. "You start trouble in town, you sleep it off in jail." "Ain't started nothing yet," the man slurred, swaying on his feet. "Just having a friendly drink with the boys. You threatened to gut Sam Miller over a card game. That's enough for tonight." Rusty reached for the man's arm. "Come along peacefully now." Instead, Burke lunged forward, drawing a knife from his boot. Pearl gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she watched through the window. But Rusty moved with surprising speed, sidestepping the attack and catching Burke's wrist. In one fluid motion, he twisted the knife away and had the larger man face down on the dirt, hands being efficiently bound behind his back. The entire confrontation had taken seconds, with minimal violence but absolute effectiveness. Rusty hauled Burke to his feet and marched him toward the jail, the crowd dispersing now that the excitement was over. Pearl stepped back from the window, strangely shaken by what she'd witnessed. Rusty Thompson was clearly more than the friendly, easygoing deputy he presented to her. There was strength there, and skill and a quiet authority that commanded respect. The next morning, Rusty appeared at the shop earlier than usual. His right cheek sported a darkening bruise that hadn't been there during the confrontation with Burke. "Good morning, Miss Nichols," he greeted her cheerfully. "Thought I'd stop by before my rounds." Pearl raised an eyebrow. "That's a nasty bruise, Deputy. I don't recall seeing Mr. Burke land a punch yesterday." Surprise flashed across his face. "You saw that, did you?" "No, Burke didn't connect. His friend took exception to the arrest later when I was locking him up. Nothing serious." "It looks serious enough," she observed. "Have you put anything on it?" "Just water," he admitted. "Sheriff Hayes says I need to improve my ducking skills." Pearl shook her head. "Wait here." She disappeared up the stairs to her apartment, returning moments later with a small jar. "This is witch hazel and arnica. It will help with the swelling and bruising." Rusty accepted the jar, their fingers brushing briefly. "Much obliged. Though I might need help applying it, can't see my own face too well." Pearl hesitated, then motioned him to a chair behind the counter. "Sit down, then." He obeyed, removing his hat and setting it on the counter. Pearl dipped her fingers into the salve and approached him, suddenly aware of their proximity. She rarely touched anyone these days, and never a man. Taking a steadying breath, she gently applied the salve to his bruised cheek. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, the stubble of his beard rough against her skin. He sat perfectly still, his blue eyes watching her face as she worked. "There," she said finally, stepping back. "That should help. Thank you, Miss Nichols." His voice was quieter than usual. "Pearl," she corrected him with a small smile. "If I'm to call you Rusty, you should call me Pearl." He smiled back, and something shifted in the air between them, a subtle change neither of them acknowledged but both felt. "Well then, Pearl," he said, rising and replacing his hat. "I'm much obliged for the doctoring. I'll return your salve once the bruise fades." After he left, Pearl found herself touching her own fingertips, remembering the warmth of his skin. Spring progressed into early summer, and Pearl's business gradually improved. Emma Wilson's hat had been a success, prompting several of her friends to place orders. Even some of Victoria Harrington's social circle began to discreetly patronize the shop, though Victoria herself remained coldly disapproving. Rusty continued his regular visits, sometimes bringing small gifts, wild strawberries he'd found while on patrol, a book of poetry from the general store's lending library, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a storm drain. "She needs a home," he'd explained, holding the tiny calico. "Thought your storeroom might have mice that need catching." Pearl had named the kitten Patches and found her to be excellent company in the apartment above the shop. One Sunday in June, Pearl finally accepted Mrs. Finch's repeated invitations to attend church services. She'd been avoiding public gatherings, but Mrs. Finch's persistence wore down her resistance. "You can't hide forever, dear," she'd insisted. "And Pastor Green gives a mercifully brief sermon, even in summer heat." Pearl wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white lace trim, and a wide-brimmed hat she designed to partially shadow her face. She walked beside Mrs. Finch, heart pounding as they approached the white clapboard church where most of the town had gathered. Conversations paused as she passed. Children stared openly until parents hushed them. Pearl kept her eyes forward, forcing herself to walk with dignity despite the knot in her stomach. Inside the church, Mrs. Finch led her to a pew near the middle. Pearl slipped in quickly, keeping her scarred side away from the aisle. She was adjusting her skirts when a familiar voice spoke beside her. "This seat taken." Pearl looked up to find Rusty Thompson standing there, dressed in a clean black suit that transformed him from rugged lawman to respectable gentleman. His hair was neatly combed and he'd clearly shaved that morning. "No," she managed. "Please join us." He settled beside her, nodding to Mrs. Finch, who was watching with obvious approval. "Beautiful day," he remarked casually. as if sitting beside Pearl in church was the most natural thing in the world. Pearl was acutely aware of the stares and whispers their seating arrangement provoked. The deputy was a respected figure in town, and his deliberate choice to sit with the scarred newcomer made a statement she wasn't sure she was comfortable with. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. Rusty looked genuinely confused. "Do what? Make a show of? Befriending me?" "People will talk." His expression softened. "Pearl, people always talk. I'm sitting here because I want to, not to make any kind of statement." Before she could respond, the organ began to play, and Pastor Green took his place at the pulpit. Throughout the service, Pearl was distracted by Rusty's presence beside her, the subtle scent of his shaving soap, the way his deep voice joined confidently in the hymns, the solid warmth of him just inches away. After the service, Pearl steeled herself for the gauntlet of greetings outside the church doors. Rusty stayed beside her, his presence somehow making it easier to face the curious stares. They were nearly past the worst of it when Victoria Harrington stepped directly into their path, her husband a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers at her side. "Deputy Thompson," she greeted Rusty warmly, completely ignoring Pearl. "Will you be attending our Independence Day celebration? Harold is organizing the town festivities this year." "Wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Harrington," Rusty replied politely. Then, deliberately, he placed his hand lightly on Pearl's back. "Miss Nichols, have you met Harold Harrington? He runs the bank and serves as town council president." Victoria's smile froze as Rusty forced her to acknowledge Pearl's existence. Harold Harrington, at least, had better manners than his wife and extended his hand. "A pleasure, Miss Nichols. Your aunt was a valued member of our community. I understand you're continuing her business with considerable skill." "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," Pearl replied, ignoring Victoria's icy glare. "I'm grateful for the welcome I've received from most of Deer Lodge's residents." Victoria's eyes narrowed at the implied criticism. "Yes, well, small towns can be provincial in their tastes and understanding. I'm sure in Philadelphia you were accustomed to more cosmopolitan attitudes." "Actually," Pearl replied evenly, "I've found more genuine kindness here than in many Philadelphia parlors. Good day, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington." She moved past them, heart racing at her own boldness. Rusty fell into step beside her, and she could swear she saw a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That was well handled," he murmured as they walked. "I shouldn't have been so pointed," Pearl replied, suddenly regretting her outspokenness. "She's an influential woman in town, and you put her in her place without being unkind. It's about time someone did." He glanced down at her. "Would you care to join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant? Their Sunday roast is decent." The invitation caught her off guard. Dining in public with Rusty would certainly fuel town gossip, but Pearl realized she didn't care as much as she'd expected. "I'd like that," she said simply. The hotel restaurant was crowded with after-church diners, and their entrance caused a momentary lull in conversation. Rusty ignored it completely, leading Pearl to a table by the window and holding her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. Over roast beef and potatoes, they talked more freely than they had in their brief shop encounters. Pearl found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, her summers with Aunt Marian learning millinery, and even hesitantly a little about the fire that had changed her life. "It was my father's house," she explained, her voice lowered. "A lamp overturned in the library. I was upstairs when the smoke began. By the time I realized what was happening, the staircase was engulfed." She paused, the memories still vivid. "I tried to escape through the window, but my nightgown caught fire as I climbed down. A neighbor saw and helped extinguish the flames, but not before you were badly burned," Rusty finished gently when she trailed off. Pearl nodded. My father didn't survive. The smoke. She took a deep breath. Afterward, I stayed with friends while I recovered, but everything changed. People who had welcomed me into their homes suddenly found excuses not to receive me. Young men who had once sought my company couldn't look me in the face. Even friends I'd known all my life seemed uncomfortable around me. "So you came west," Rusty said, understanding in his eyes. "Not immediately. I tried to rebuild my life in Philadelphia for 2 years. I even worked in a millinery shop there, but the owner kept me in the back room away from customers." Pearl's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. She said I was bad for business. When I received the letter about Aunt Marion's death and my inheritance, it seemed like Providence a chance to start fresh where no one knew me before. Rusty was quiet for a moment. "People can be cruel without even realizing it," he said finally. "But not everyone judges by appearances." "Don't they?" Pearl challenged softly. "Be honest, Deputy. When you first saw my scars, what did you think?" He met her gaze directly. "I thought you were a woman who had survived something terrible with her dignity intact, and I thought you had the most expressive eyes I'd ever seen." Pearl felt her cheeks warm at his words, unsure how to respond. She was saved by the arrival of apple pie for dessert, allowing the conversation to shift to lighter topics. After dinner, Rusty walked her back to her shop, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the street. At her door, he hesitated. "I enjoyed our dinner," he said. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime." Pearl found herself smiling. "I'd like that." He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused. "Independence Day is next week. The town holds a picnic and dance at the meadow by the creek. Would you consider attending with me?" The invitation filled Pearl with equal parts longing and dread. A dance would mean more public scrutiny than she'd faced yet, more opportunity for whispers and stares. But it would also mean an evening in Rusty's company. "I'll consider it," she promised. That night, Pearl lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, thoughts circling around Rusty Thompson and his inexplicable interest in her. No man had shown her such attention since before the fire. Was it merely kindness motivating him? Pity, or something more genuine? The week leading up to Independence Day was busy with last-minute orders for holiday bonnets and decorative hatbands. Pearl worked long hours, grateful for the distraction from her own thoughts. The evening before the holiday, as Pearl was trimming a hat with red, white, and blue ribbons, the shop bell jingled. Looking up, she was surprised to see Sheriff Hayes enter, his weathered face serious beneath his gray, streaked hair. "Miss Nichols," he greeted her, hat in hand. "Hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all, Sheriff. What can I do for you?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "It's about my deputy, Miss Nichols, about Rusty." Pearl's heart skipped. "Has something happened to him?" No, nothing like that," Hayes assured her quickly. "But I felt I should speak with you woman to man about his attentions toward you." Pearl stiffened. "I wasn't aware that my personal affairs were the concern of the sheriff's office." Hayes sighed. "They're not. I'm here as a friend to you both. Rusty is like a son to me, Miss Nichols. He's a good man, the best I know. But he's also a man who takes his responsibilities seriously, sometimes too seriously." "I don't understand what you're implying, Sheriff." Hayes studied her face for a moment. "Rusty told me about that first day, how those passengers on the stagecoach treated you when they saw your scars. It bothered him deeply." Pearl looked away. "He was kind that day, as he has been since." "That's just it, Miss Nichols. Rusty has always been protective of those he sees as vulnerable. I'm concerned his interest in you might stem from that protective instinct rather than—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Rather than genuine attraction," Pearl finished for him, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "You believe he's showing me attention out of pity?" Hayes winced. I didn't say that exactly, but Rusty takes his duty to this town and its people seriously. I wouldn't want either of you to mistake gallantry for something deeper. Pearl straightened her shoulders, fighting to maintain her composure. Thank you for your concern, Sheriff. I assure you, I harbor no illusions about Deputy Thompson's motivations. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have orders to complete. After Hayes left, Pearl locked the shop door and leaned against it, eyes closed against threatening tears. The sheriff's words had given voice to her own deepest fears, that Rusty's kindness was born of pity, rather than any genuine interest in her as a woman. By morning, Pearl had made her decision. She sent a note to Rusty declining his invitation to the Independence Day celebrations, citing a migraine headache. Then she closed the shop for the holiday and remained in her apartment, ignoring the sounds of celebration from the town. She was seated by the window reading a book or attempting to read, as her mind kept wandering when a knock at the shop door startled her. Peering down from her window, she saw Rusty standing on the boardwalk below, still dressed in his holiday best, clean black trousers and a crisp white shirt, his usual deputy's badge absent for the festivities. Pearl hesitated, then went downstairs. She opened the door just enough to speak through. "Deputy Thompson, shouldn't you be at the celebration? Missed seeing you there," he said simply. "Came to check on your headache. It's better, thank you, but I'm not feeling up to crowds today." He studied her face. "May I come in for a moment? Won't stay long." Pearl reluctantly widened the door, allowing him to enter the darkened shop. She lit a lamp, avoiding his eyes. "Sheriff Hayes came to see me yesterday," she said before he could speak. "He was concerned about your intentions toward me." Rusty's expression darkened. "Hayes should mind his own business. He cares about you, and he made some valid points." Pearl gathered her courage. "Rusty, I appreciate your kindness since my arrival, but I don't need a protector. I've managed on my own for 3 years, and I'll continue to do so." "Is that what you think this is? Protection?" There was an edge to his voice she hadn't heard before. "You think I've been spending time with you out of some misplaced sense of duty, haven't you?" she challenged. The scarred newcomer, mocked by passengers, snubbed by the town's leading lady, what better project for the gallant deputy? Rusty took a step closer, his eyes intent on hers. "You think that's why I seek out your company? Why I find excuses to visit your shop nearly every day? Why I can't seem to get you out of my thoughts?" Pearl's heart raced at his words and his nearness. What other reason could there be? "Look at me, Rusty. Really look." She turned her scarred side fully toward him in the lamplight. "This is what I am now. This is what I'll always be." "I have looked," he said, his voice low and fervent. "I've done nothing but look since the first day I saw you. And do you know what I see, Pearl? I see courage in the way you hold yourself despite the stares. I see grace in how you handle even Victoria Harrington's cruelty. I see talent in your work, kindness in your dealings with others, and a quiet humor that catches me off guard." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could stop him if she wished, and gently touched her cheek, the scarred side she kept hidden from the world. "And yes, I see beauty. Not despite these." His fingers traced lightly over her scars, "but including them. They're part of you, part of your story." Pearl stood frozen, scarcely breathing as his fingers moved over her damaged skin with a reverence no one had shown her in years. His touch was gentle, almost a caress, and his eyes never left hers. "I don't want your pity," she whispered, even as she fought the urge to lean into his touch. "Good," he replied, "because I'm not offering it. What I feel for you isn't pity, Pearl." Then, slowly enough that she could have pulled away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, right along the edge of a scar that ran from her temple into her hairline. The kiss was gentle, almost chaste, but it sent a shiver through her entire body. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known," he murmured against her skin. "And if you need time to believe that, I'll wait." Pearl didn't realize she was crying until he gently wiped a tear from her unscarred cheek with his thumb. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed by her emotional reaction. "Don't be." His smile was tender. "But I should go and let you rest. Just think about what I said, and know that I meant every word." After he left, Pearl stood in the darkened shop for a long time, her fingers tracing the places his lips and hands had touched, wondering if she dared believe him. The next morning, Pearl opened the shop as usual, but her thoughts were far from millinery. Rusty's words and actions the night before had shaken her carefully constructed defenses, leaving her uncertain and vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in years. Mid-morning, the bell jingled and Rusty walked in. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept well, but his smile was warm. "Morning," he greeted her, hat in hand. "Thought I'd check if that headache improved." Pearl couldn't help smiling back. "Much better, thank you." "Good." He seemed unsure what to say next, a rare hesitation for the usually confident deputy. "About last night, Rusty," she interrupted. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I'm not sure I'm brave enough to believe you yet, but I'd like to try." His face lit up with a smile that transformed his features. "That's all I'm asking for, Pearl. A chance to show you I mean what I say." From that day forward, something shifted between them. Rusty still visited the shop regularly, but now there was an openness to their interactions that hadn't existed before. He began escorting her to Sunday church services, indifferent to the gossip it generated. They took walks together in the evenings when his duties allowed, gradually learning each other's histories and dreams. Pearl learned that Rusty had fought for the Union during the war, serving in a Pennsylvania regiment despite his Kentucky upbringing. He'd come west afterward, unable to return to a home divided by the conflict, and found his calling in law enforcement under Sheriff Hayes's mentorship. "I was angry after the war," he admitted one evening as they walked along the creek that ran behind the town. "Saw too much death, too much senseless cruelty. Hayes helped me channel that anger into something useful." In turn, Pearl told him more about her life before and after the fire, her privileged upbringing as the daughter of a successful attorney, the shock of losing everything in a single night, and the painful lessons in human nature that followed. "The hardest part wasn't the physical pain," she confessed. "It was realizing how shallow most relationships had been. People I thought cared about me couldn't see past my scars to the person underneath." Rusty took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Their loss," he said simply. As summer progressed into early autumn, Pearl's business flourished despite Victoria Harrington's continued disdain. Word had spread about the quality of her work, and orders came not only from Deer Lodge but from neighboring settlements as well. The growing connection between Pearl and the deputy was a popular topic of town gossip, but Pearl found herself caring less with each passing day. Rusty's steady presence in her life had given her a confidence she'd thought lost forever. One crisp September evening, Rusty invited Pearl to ride with him to a spot he wanted to show her. He arrived at the shop at closing time, leading 2 horses, his own sturdy bay and a gentle, dappled mare. "Can you ride?" he asked as he helped her lock up. "I used to before." She gestured to her face, "But it's been years." "The mare's gentle as a lamb," he assured her, "and I'll be right beside you." They rode out of town just as the sun was beginning its descent, casting golden light across the valley. Rusty led them along the creek, then up a gentle slope to a ridge overlooking Deer Lodge and the surrounding mountains. The view was breathtaking, the town below looking like a child's toy set, the mountains rising majestically beyond, their peaks already dusted with early snow, and the vast Montana sky painted in shades of gold, pink, and deepening blue. "It's beautiful," Pearl breathed, dismounting with Rusty's help. "I come here to think sometimes," he said, securing the horses to a nearby tree. "Helps put things in perspective." He spread a blanket on the ground and they sat side by side, watching the sun sink lower toward the mountains. Pearl was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the slight touch of his shoulder against hers. "Pearl," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "these past months getting to know you, they've meant more to me than I can say." She turned to look at him, her heart quickening at the intensity in his blue eyes. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards," he continued, "and I know you've had reason to be cautious with your trust. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is real and true and growing stronger every day." Pearl's breath caught as he took her hands in his. "I love you, Pearl Nichols. Every part of you, your strength, your kindness, your courage. The way you furrow your brow when you're concentrating on a difficult design. The sound of your laugh, rare as it is. The light in your eyes when you forget to be guarded." Tears blurred Pearl's vision as he reached up to gently trace the line of scars along her cheek. "And yes, I love this face, every curve, every line, every scar that tells the story of your survival." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips gently to the most prominent scar that ran from her temple to her jaw. The tender gesture broke something open inside her, a dam of emotion she'd held back for years. "Rusty," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," he assured her, though hope and vulnerability mingled in his expression. "I just needed you to know." Pearl reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, the slight roughness of his evening stubble. "I've been afraid to hope," she admitted, "afraid to believe someone could see past." "There's nothing to see past," he interrupted gently. "Your scars are part of you, not something separate. They're beautiful because they're yours, because they show your strength." He leaned forward and kissed another scar, this one near the corner of her mouth. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin. Then he kissed the scarred place where her right eyebrow should have been. "Beautiful." Each gentle press of his lips against her damaged skin was like a benediction, healing something deep within her that had been broken for years. Tears flowed freely down her face now, but they were tears of release, of a burden finally lifted. When he finally pulled back to look into her eyes, Pearl found the courage she'd been gathering since the day they met. "I love you too, Rusty Thompson," she whispered. "I think I have almost since the beginning, though I was afraid to admit it even to myself." His smile was radiant as he drew her closer, one hand cradling her face, both the scarred and unscarred sides, as he finally, gently, pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. They stayed on the ridge until the first stars appeared, talking softly about possibilities and dreams, about fears conquered and hopes renewed. When they finally rode back to town, something fundamental had changed, not just between them, but within Pearl herself. For the first time in 3 years, she felt whole again. The following Sunday, Pearl entered the church on Rusty's arm, wearing a new hat she'd designed specifically for the occasion, a confection of blue ribbons that matched her eyes and delicate cream lace that complemented, rather than concealed, her scars. She held her head high as they walked to their usual pew, meeting curious gazes with a small smile rather than averted eyes. After the service, Rusty kept her hand tucked in the crook of his arm as they navigated the usual post-church socializing. Victoria Harrington pointedly turned away when they approached, but Pearl found she didn't mind in the slightest. They were about to leave when Emma Wilson hurried over, her young face glowing with excitement. "Miss Nichols, Deputy Thompson, I have wonderful news. I'm engaged." She held out her left hand to display a simple silver band. "Thomas proposed last night and Papa gave his blessing." "Congratulations, Emma," Pearl said warmly. "Thomas Cooper is a lucky man." "Thank you, and I was hoping. Would you make my wedding bonnet?" "I can't imagine anyone else creating something so important." Pearl was touched by the young woman's request. "I'd be honored, Emma." As they walked back toward the shop, Rusty chuckled softly. "You've won over the town's young ladies completely. Victoria Harrington doesn't stand a chance." Pearl smiled. "She's welcome to her opinion. I've stopped defining myself by what others see when they look at me." Rusty squeezed her hand. "That's my girl." That evening, as they sat in the small parlor above the shop enjoying a quiet supper, Rusty surprised Pearl by producing a small velvet box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment," he confessed, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "After last night, I don't want to wait anymore." Pearl's heart raced as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny pearls. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of value I have from before the war." He slid from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hand in his. "Pearl Nichols, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You've brought light and joy back into my life, and I want to spend the rest of my days trying to do the same for you." His voice was steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Pearl's vision blurred with tears as she looked at the man kneeling before her, this strong, gentle soul who had seen her beauty when she could not see it herself. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Rusty Thompson, I will marry you." His answering smile was brilliant as he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that held all the tenderness and passion of their newfound love. News of their engagement spread through Deer Lodge with typical small-town efficiency. Most reactions were positive. Sheriff Hayes was among the first to offer congratulations, admitting ruefully that he'd been wrong about Rusty's motivations. Mrs. Finch was ecstatic, immediately offering to host a celebration dinner. Victoria Harrington's set was less enthusiastic, but Pearl found their disapproval increasingly irrelevant to her happiness. They set the wedding date for November, wanting a small ceremony before winter made travel difficult for the few distant friends they'd invited. Pearl designed her own wedding ensemble, a dove-gray dress with sapphire blue trim, and a matching hat adorned with silk flowers and delicate veiling that complemented rather than concealed her face. The weeks leading to the wedding passed in a happy blur of preparations. Rusty had purchased a small house on the edge of town, and they spent evenings making plans for their future home. Pearl would continue running the millinery shop, which was now thriving, while Rusty maintained his position as deputy. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the mountains surrounding Deer Lodge frosted with early snow. Pearl dressed with Mrs. Finch's help, her hands trembling slightly as she pinned her hat in place. "You look beautiful, my dear," Mrs. Finch said, tears in her eyes as she adjusted Pearl's veil. "Marion would be so proud to see you today." Pearl touched the older woman's hand gratefully. "Thank you for everything, Harriet, for your friendship when I needed it most." "Nonsense," Mrs. Finch replied briskly, though her eyes remained damp. "Now let's not keep that handsome deputy waiting." The church was filled with townspeople, friends, and customers Pearl had made over the months, colleagues of Rusty's, even a few travelers staying at the hotel who had been caught up in the town's excitement. Conspicuously absent were Victoria Harrington and her immediate circle, but their absence was a small cloud in an otherwise perfect day. Pearl walked down the aisle alone, her head held high. At the altar waited Rusty, resplendent in a new black suit, his face alight with love and pride as he watched her approach. Pastor Green led them through their vows, which they had written themselves. When it came time for Rusty to speak his promises, his voice rang clear through the church. "Pearl, when I first saw you, I recognized a kindred spirit, someone who had faced hardship but refused to be defined by it. Your courage inspired me, your kindness humbled me, and your beauty both inside and out captivated me completely." He took her hands in his. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings us. I promise to remind you of your strength when you forget it, to cherish every part of you, every smile, every tear, every scar. I promise to love you faithfully until my last breath, and if there's a life beyond this one, I'll find you there and love you still." Pearl's voice trembled slightly as she spoke her own vows. "Rusty, you saw me when I was trying desperately not to be seen. You looked past my defenses and found the woman I thought was lost forever. Your steadfast heart and gentle strength gave me courage to step out of shadows I'd been hiding in for years." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice grew stronger. "I promise to walk beside you through all of life's joys and sorrows. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your faithful wife. I promise to remember, even in our darkest moments, the light you brought back into my life. And I promise to love you, completely and without reservation, for all the days we're granted together." When Pastor Green pronounced them husband and wife, Rusty drew Pearl into his arms and kissed her with such tender reverence that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The reception was held at the hotel, its dining room festooned with evergreen boughs and white ribbons. Pearl had expected to feel uncomfortable being the center of attention for so long, but with Rusty at her side, she found herself genuinely enjoying the celebration. After the cake had been cut and the toasts offered, Rusty led her onto the floor for their first dance as husband and wife. As they moved to the gentle strains of the fiddle and piano, he held her close, his cheek against her hair. "Happy, Mrs. Thompson," he murmured. Pearl looked up at him, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." He smiled, then leaned down to press a gentle kiss to the scar that curved along her cheekbone. "Beautiful," he whispered, just for her ears. "Every inch of you beautiful." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth and light of their celebration, Pearl finally, completely believed him. 2 years later, Pearl stood in the doorway of their home, watching as Rusty rode up the path, their 1-year-old son Robert cradled securely in one arm. The boy's delighted giggles carried on the summer breeze as his father bounced him gently in the saddle. Their life together had settled into a rhythm of deep contentment. Pearl still ran the millinery shop, now with the help of Emma Cooper, whose wedding the previous year had been the social event of the season. Rusty continued as deputy, though Sheriff Hayes had begun talking of retirement, suggesting Rusty as his natural successor. The house they'd made their home had expanded with the addition of a nursery when Robert was born, and the garden Pearl had planted their first spring together now bloomed in riotous color. Victoria Harrington had eventually abandoned her campaign against Pearl, especially after Sheriff Hayes's wife became one of Pearl's most loyal customers. The banker's wife now offered stiff nods when they passed in town, which Pearl considered victory enough. As Rusty dismounted, carefully lifting little Robert down with him, Pearl's hand unconsciously touched the slight swell of her stomach where their second child was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Rusty yet, saving the news for tonight's dinner. "There's my beautiful wife," Rusty called, striding toward her with Robert perched on his shoulders, little hands gripping his father's hair. Pearl moved to meet them, laughing as Robert reached for her with chubby hands. "And how were your adventures today, my little cowboy, Mama?" Robert crowed, tumbling into her arms as Rusty carefully transferred him. "Horse, big horse. Is that so?" Pearl pressed a kiss to his soft cheek. "Did Daddy let you steer all by yourself? He thinks he was steering," Rusty said with a wink, leaning in to kiss Pearl hello. His hand lingered on her scarred cheek in a familiar caress. "How was your day, love?" "Productive. 3 hats finished for the Simmons sisters and a new design I want to show you." She shifted Robert to her hip. "And I've been planning a special dinner tonight." "Oh, what's the occasion?" Pearl smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." Later, after Robert had been bathed, fed, and tucked into his crib with stories and kisses, Pearl and Rusty sat at their dining table enjoying the beef stew and biscuits she'd prepared. She'd lit candles and used their best dishes, a wedding gift from Sheriff Hayes and his wife. "This is a mighty fine dinner for an ordinary Thursday," Rusty observed, watching her with knowing eyes. "You're up to something, Mrs. Thompson." Pearl smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I have news," she said simply. "Good news, I hope." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Pearl, are you?" She nodded, her free hand moving to her stomach. "Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday. We'll have a new addition around Christmas time." Rusty was out of his chair in an instant, gathering her into his arms and lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. "A Christmas baby! Oh, Pearl, that's wonderful news." Pearl laughed as he set her down, his hand still gentle on her waist. "So you're pleased?" "Pleased." His eyes shone with joy. "I'm ecstatic. Robert will have a brother or sister, and you." He touched her face tenderly. "You'll be even more beautiful carrying our child." Pearl leaned into his touch, marveling at how natural it now felt to accept such compliments. The path to this happiness hadn't been easy, but standing in their cozy home with Rusty's arms around her and their growing family surrounding them, Pearl knew every step had been worth taking. "I love you, Rusty Thompson," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "And I love you, Pearl Thompson," he replied against her lips. "Every single day more than the day before." As his lips traced the familiar path of her scars before finding her mouth in a deeper kiss, Pearl silently thanked the twist of fate that had brought her to Deer Lodge and into the arms of the man who had taught her to see her own beauty through his eyes. In his love, she had found not just acceptance, but celebration of all that she was, scars and all.